If you're fairly new to woodworking, it's probably safe to assume that this represents your only exposure to the world of lumber. Whether you made a coffee table from 2x6s or a simple shelf you built for your kids' room, this is most likely where the wood for your first projects came from. But there's a whole other, sometimes hidden world that could be right under your nose and you don't even know it. Amazing places filled with the most beautiful hardwood lumber you've ever seen. But if you're going to wander into this new world, you're going to have to learn their mysterious ways. Because these places don't look like a big box store and they don't operate the same way. But if you know a couple key things, you're going to be rewarded with the best experience and the best materials in woodworking and save hundreds of dollars in the process. So the first question you may have is, where the heck do I even find this stuff? And well, this is the part where I get to be that guy and say, Google is your friend. No, seriously, just search for hardwood supplier near me or pop in the name of the closest city and that's going to be a great place to begin your search. Hardwood being the key search term here, because if you just search lumber supplier, you're most likely going to get a lot of results related to building supply companies that just sell the same dimensional construction lumber that the big box stores sell and don't sell much of any of what we're looking for. Okay, once you've found a place, strap in because this is where the ride gets bumpy. Almost as soon as you arrive at one of these places, you're going to feel like you don't belong here, like you've accidentally wandered into the underbelly of the supply chain with people zooming around on fork trucks stacked high with lumber. So this is probably a good time to mention that this experience is going to be way different than the retail shopping that you're used to, but hang in there. There's only like 4 huge differences standing between you and your newfound treasure. Come on, that's easy. Immediately upon walking into one of these places, you're going to notice that this doesn't look anything like buying at a big box store. Instead of having things neatly arranged in aisles with labels that tell you the size and the price, hardwood is often sold in places that look like this. A big warehouse with bunks of lumber stacked to the ceiling. And oftentimes it's just going to be difficult for you to even identify the wood species that you're looking at. If you're really lucky, they may have some stuff tagged, or you might spot a word that you recognize written on the side of the board with a Sharpie. Otherwise, and I hate to even say this part out loud, but you're going to have to do something as a DIYer you're not used to doing. You got to ask for help. You're going to have to tell someone who works there what species of wood you're looking for and then wait for them to locate and pull that bunk of material down so that you can select your boards. You'll also notice something else while you're browsing your stack of lumber. Every board is a different size. Hardwood lumber is often milled and stacked as is right off the saw, so you can have an 8-inch board laying right next to a 14-inch board. And because of this variety of length and width, dealers price their lumber differently. Instead of paying a set price per board or paying by the linear foot like at a big box store, these places are going to charge you by something called a board foot, and that's not a measurement of length or weight, it's a measurement of volume. And so the easiest way to calculate this is to multiply the board's length times its width times its thickness, all in inches, that's key, and then divide the whole thing by 144. And sorry if you use metric, I really can't help you on this one. I have no clue how many liters per Celsius that is. All right, so here's an example of what I mean. This board is 12 inches wide, 12 inches long, and 1 inch thick, which makes this 1 board foot. This board is 6 inches wide, 24 inches long, and 1 inch thick, which also makes this 1 board foot. And this board, well, actually, hold on just a second. Okay, and this board is 3 inches wide, 24 inches long, and 2 inches thick, which also makes this 1 board foot. This number will sometimes be written right here on the end of the board to make it easy to track. And here's a pro tip, just get one of these little keychain tape measures and throw it in your vehicle. Now you have a quick way of knowing how wide each board is that you're looking at so you can estimate how many board feet you're buying. Also, you're not going to find prices displayed anywhere. You're going to have to ask them what the current price per board foot is, and also be aware that they may upcharge you a little bit for thicker boards or if the material's already been surfaced. So knowing how to find the best sources of hardwood in your area is definitely going to improve your experience in this hobby, which is exactly why I wanted to make this video, because I think everybody deserves to know the best options for them. And I think the exact same thing is true when it comes to your health. I've changed cities now multiple times as an adult, and searching for providers, looking for who takes my insurance, and waiting months to get on the new patient schedule is a drag. Honestly, after a while, I would just avoid reestablishing care as soon as I should have. And hey, with smartphones, it's even easier to just Google your symptoms and put off seeing a real doctor. But the sponsor of this video, ZocDoc, is here to help. ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the one that's right for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. If you're looking for primary care, dental, skincare, mental health services, you name it, ZocDoc makes it easy to book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers. And one of the coolest parts is when you find a doctor that you want, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose the time that works best for you, and instantly book a visit with just a few clicks. And ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within 24 to 72 hours of booking, and sometimes even same-day appointments, which is awesome. Your health is definitely more important than your hobby, so why not discover where the best options for care can be found? Stop Googling it and head to ZocDoc.com/MWA Woodworks to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. And thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video. In this process, you may get caught off guard by a term you've never heard before, and that's because hardwood lumber dealers use the quarter system to describe the thickness of boards. And all that means is that the thickness of the board is measured in quarters of an inch. Typically, the thinnest material they'll carry is 4/4 or 1 inch, but they can also carry 5/4, 6/4, 8/4, even 12 and 16/4 for special use cases. And if you're wondering why this quarter system exists at all, like why don't they just use inches, it's actually an old carryover from the sawmill industry where sawyers would typically adjust their sawmills 1/4 of an inch at a time when sawing up a log. And while this measurement is a little bit weird and different, it's actually less misleading than what you'll find at a big box store. We all know that a 2x4 isn't actually 2x4. It's smaller, but hey, take a look at this hardwood they sell. This board is called a 1x6, but it's actually 3/4 of an inch, not 1 inch, and it's not 6 inches, it's 5.5. So this board is more than 25% less material than what it sounds like you're getting. And this is not the case when you buy hardwoods at a dealer. A 4/4 rough sawn board will typically be a little bit thicker than 1 inch, and a 4/4 board that's been surfaced will be just slightly thinner than 1 inch due to the milling process. This is going to be a critical point later when you have to hit specific thicknesses for your project parts. The final difference you'll notice is that these boards don't look anything like what you buy at a big box store, which will always carry pre-surfaced or S4S lumber. This means the boards are plain flat on both sides and ripped straight on both edges. Hardwood dealers typically don't carry S4S lumber. Usually the best you'll find is S3S, which means surfaced on two sides and straight line ripped down one edge just to make it easier to go through your table saw. But you can also find S2S lumber, which doesn't have any straight edges, or by far the easiest to find is rough sawn lumber, which doesn't have any milled surfaces, so I guess that makes it SOS? Rough sawn just means that the boards have come straight off the mill so you can still see the mill marks and it has no surfacing done to it on any of its sides. These boards will almost always be your cheapest option and contain the most material. So there is more value and flexibility in buying rough sawn lumber, but there is one big thing standing in your way of taking advantage of this value. But before I get to that, I wouldn't be doing this video any justice if I didn't at least mention other places where you can get hardwoods. Now, I did spend the most time talking about local hardwood dealers because in my experience, that's by far the cheapest option with the most knowledgeable staff and the greatest variety. But there is one big drawback, which is that most of these places keep very short business hours. Because the bulk of their business is selling to professionals, it's very common for them to be open, say, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. and not at all on weekends. So if you have a day job and do most of your woodworking in the evening or weekends, you can see how this is not an insignificant issue. If you happen to live near a woodworking retail chain like Rockler or Woodcraft, they do carry a pretty decent selection of hardwoods from basic domestics like oak, cherry, and walnut, as well as exotics like purple-hearted padauk. These stores tend to be open later in the evening so that you can stop in after work, and they're open on the weekends. The main drawbacks to these locations is that the lumber is going to be more expensive and the selection is going to be a little more limited. For instance, you're not going to find very much rough sawn lumber here, and most of the surface boards are going to be just under 4/4 with some options for 8/4. One really nice thing is they offer a selection of short and narrow boards, especially in the exotics. And both Woodcraft and Rockler stores have bins where you can buy offcuts by the pound for smaller projects, which is super nice. And your local independent lumber dealers probably won't have this option. And then there's the online retailers, which I've not used myself because I have so many local options, but after doing some research, browsing prices and availability, it does seem like they have a really good variety of both domestic and import lumber, and it feels a whole lot like an online version of Rockler or Woodcraft. It's all going to be surfaced lumber, and the pricing seems pretty comparable, but, and this is a big but, you have to factor in the considerable cost of shipping. If you're only needing boards that are 3 to 4 feet long, this may not be so bad, but if you're looking for full-size 8 to 12 foot lumber, this could quickly become cost prohibitive. But then again, you may be in a situation where this is just the only option even remotely possible for your area. And then last but not least, no, actually, I take that back. It's definitely the least, the big box stores. These stores typically will only carry 2 to 3 domestic hardwoods, and they tend to be the least desirable options like red oak or poplar. All of this lumber is going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, with the only other option being these small project boards. You're also going to find out a lot of this lumber is twisted and bowed, and the problem is it's already milled to 3/4 of an inch thick, so you don't have much, if any, room to flatten it back out with milling tools. And then there's the obscene pricing. I did a comparison in a previous video of 1x12 red oak from the Big Orange Board versus my lumber dealer, and the price was $70 more for a board that was 25% thinner. That was $4 a board foot versus a laughable $17. I mean, come on. So big box stores, you get an F for selection, an F for quality, and then somehow you managed an F- for price. So if the lumber you bought is anything less than S4S, you're on the hook for getting it the rest of the way before it can be used in your project. You have to start by getting one of these faces perfectly flat, and this is one of the jobs of a jointer. And I've talked about this in other videos, but you don't actually need a jointer to get a board flat. If you have a planer, you can make a planer sled, which does basically the same thing, but instead of the side that you want to flatten facing down, you face it up towards the planer blades. The sled is there basically to shim up the board and remove any rocking, and to have something to fasten the board to so that it doesn't slide off the sled at the worst possible time. And once the board is flat, you can remove it from the sled and use the planer for its real purpose, which is getting the opposite side of the board perfectly parallel to the flat side. Congratulations, now you have an S2S board. Now the next step is going to be to straighten one of these edges and make it nice and square to these faces. This is another job that the jointer was born to do, but once again, we're not going to need one to do it because I know of not one, but 2 other ways to do this. The first is with a track saw. The aluminum track that the saw rides on helps you get a perfectly straight cut, and with the saw set to 90 degrees, you can make that cut nice and square. And if you don't have a track saw, that's okay. The other way that you could do this is by making something called an L-fence for your table saw. I have a whole video that goes into the magical abilities of the L-fence, but for this purpose, all you need to know is that the fence sits right over the blade, perfectly flush with the outside. You use a runner or some kind of straight edge to fasten right along the cut line and then make the cut, keeping that straight edge in contact with the fence, and everything that passes underneath the fence is going to get removed, leaving you with that straight square cut. Now you have an S3S board, which means there's just one edge left. And you might think, oh, now's my chance to use that jointer, but again, we won't be giving that machine any love. Yes, the jointer can make this edge both flat and square, no problem, but there's no way to guarantee that this edge is going to be parallel to the opposite edge. The best way to clean up this last edge is to get rid of that L-fence and make the cut at the table saw. That's going to make sure that that final side is square with the top and bottom and parallel to the opposite edge, giving you a perfectly milled S4S board. So to recap, if you buy S3S lumber, you can take that right to the table saw, but S2S means you're going to need to build an L-fence for that table saw or invest in a track saw. And for rough sawn lumber, you can get away with as little as a table saw and a planer as long as you build the L-fence and the sled to go with them. Well, now that your board's all milled up, you're probably all jazzed up and ready to cut it into final parts, right? But don't you do it. I want you to stop, take a deep breath, and step away from the board. You probably already know that wood moves and changes naturally with the seasons, but that's not the only time that it does this. Depending on how this tree grew, how it was milled, and how it was dried, there can be a lot of stress and tension built up inside the lumber. And the cutting and the milling process can release those tensions. And since you don't know how the tree was grown or milled or dried, you don't know what it wants to do. And so the next step is to just set it aside for the day and let it breathe and move how it wants to. The best thing to do is to cut some scraps of wood into stickers like this and then stack your board so that the air can circulate around all 4 sides. When you come back tomorrow, check to see if your lumber has any new cups, bows, or twists, and if they do, go ahead and lightly re-mill those out of the boards. One benefit of using hardwood lumber over construction lumber is the lack of pith. If you don't know what pith is, that's the dead center of the tree. This is very often left in construction lumber, and this is a big reason that wood bows and twists so much. But when sawmills cut hardwood lumber, they usually mill around the pith and either count that as waste material or just turn it into something like fence posts. Another way that hardwoods are different than what you're used to is material planning, and it may sound extreme to you at first, but I aim to purchase about 20% more material than I think I'm going to need for my project, and here's 4 reasons why that makes so much sense. Reason number 1 is variability. Because some boards are going to be narrower and some much wider, you're probably not going to be able to buy the exact amount of material you need for your project. For instance, you may need to buy an additional board that you're only going to use a portion of in order to get enough to make your parts, or you may decide that 8-foot boards are all you really need for your project, but the dealer only carries 10 and 12-foot in stock. Reason number 2 is board thickness. If your project parts need to have a final thickness of 3/4 of an inch, well then a 4/4 board is going to be just fine. But if your parts need to be 1 inch thick, you're probably going to have to bump that up to 5/4 lumber. Reason number 3 is defects. Wood is a natural material, so you're going to have to learn to work around things like knots, splits, and defects that could be present in the board, which means the entire board may not be usable. This is most common at the extreme ends of the board, but it may be that you don't discover the defect until you start cutting into the lumber. And reason number 4 is, of course, user error. No matter how much experience you have, you will eventually screw something up. Whether you cut a part to the wrong size or you screw up the placement of your joinery and you have to remake that entire part from scratch, having extra material on hand is way better than the alternative, which is making that drive back to the dealer to buy that 1 extra board, which is kind of like the woodworker's version of the walk of shame. So if you're completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of hardwood choices, here's a quick rundown of my recommendations of what to use based on what you want to build. Poplar is a cheaper option that isn't super attractive but is really good for painted projects. It's a little on the softer side, so if you're looking for something more durable, you might choose an option like maple. It's also on the cheaper side of hardwoods, but it's super strong and dense, and it also paints really well. Walnut, cherry, mahogany, ash, and oak, these are your money hardwoods, and these are really good for things like furniture, cabinets, and kitchen items like cutting boards. Exotic species like purple heart and padauk are really great for adding accents and pops of color to your projects. And species like white oak, sapele, and teak, and actually I don't have any teak to show you, but these are all great species for outdoor projects because they do really well at resisting rot and bugs. Well, now you know all the key things to tackling your first trip to a hardwood lumber dealer. Now, if you want to know all the secrets to getting the best plywood available, check this video out right here. And until next time, have fun in the shop.